So we're going to be doing some testing on this R7 3700X system we've got. It's running on a B450M gigabyte. This is pretty much an all Oris build I've got going on here. But what we're going to test is this VRM cooler for water block mounts, CPU water blocks that I designed, 3D printed, and I'm testing right now. So I'm going to test it with the VRM cooler on, which is basically a 120 millimeter fan mounted up that's pointing straight at the VRMs and over the block, and without it. So we'll see what the difference is in how it performs with and without active VRM cooling. So we're booted in right now to this AMD system, and it's the R7 3700X with 8 cores, 16 threads. We're running PBO right now with 4.6 gigahertz as the peak, but the all-core is pretty much the same at 4.1, using an AIO for cooling on the system. And so at idle, the motherboard's reporting that the VRMs are at 43 degrees Celsius. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to stress the processor here using CPU ID's stress program to get the VRMs to a peak temperature without our VRM cooler solution. So let's see what this looks like. So without any active cooling on the VRMs, we're stressing out the system, where you can see that the CPU is easily getting hit with max voltage, near max voltage, 1.3 volts, max frequency 4.1 gigahertz, and the motherboard is reporting that the VRM temps are have climbed all the way up to 55 degrees Celsius. You can see that we've got a core temp of the CPU of 75 degrees Celsius. All 8 cores running at 4.1 gigahertz. And our VRMs are climbing. They're going up to 56 degrees, and it's going to continue to climb here. So after only a couple minutes of load, the VRM temps have already climbed all the way up to 57 degrees Celsius. We're going to turn off the CPU ID stress program. We're going to run Cinebench R20. Let's see how hot R20 gets the VRMs. So even though R20 is a fairly heavy load, it doesn't get the CPU that hot. 69 degrees is where the CPU's at. It was a lot hotter just on CPU ID's stress program at a higher frequency. This is a little bit lower frequency, but it's a lower core temp, about 5 degrees cooler core temp. But the VRMs have climbed all the way up to 60 degrees Celsius. So kind of load that Cinebench R20 does in a very short amount of time gets the VRMs very hot. And so by the time R20 is able to run, we had the VRMs all the way past 60 degrees Celsius here with a peak of 60 degrees Celsius. Now we're going to turn on our VRM cooler and let's see where the temps go. So now we've got the VRM cooler fan turned on directly over the water block, and we're still running the same specs. If you look, the VRM idle temp is down almost 7 degrees Celsius now to 35°C at idle, and we're going to run the stress test and let it run for a few minutes, and let's see what's the hottest that it gets. Alright, so now we've been running the full load on the CPU and the VRMs for about the same amount of time as we did before when temperatures escalated using CPU ID's stress program. The max we're seeing is 47 degrees Celsius, so 5 degrees Celsius cooler than what we were seeing before. I'm going to stop this and I'm going to run Cinebench R20 again. Let's see if we reach the same kind of peak numbers that we were able to hit before for temperature. So we're running R20 right now, and before the end of the run of R20, you see it's at full load. Temps are lower than they were running CPU ID stress program, but the most we're seeing out of the VRMs is 48 degrees Celsius. It's not getting anywhere near the 60 degrees Celsius peak for VRM temps that we saw without the VRM cooler solution. That's a pretty significant difference between having the VRM cooler and not having the VRM cooler. All right, so I couldn't get too deep into overclocking because I think it's going to take a little bit more time to fine tune it. But one thing that's interesting is Ryzen Master shows that even with a manual overclock and manual voltage set, the clocks do downclock itself, right? But in some telemetry software like HW Info, it shows that the frequency is fixed, but it's not in here. Because if you apply the load, you'll see that I've got a 4.4 manual overclock set right now, and it's going all 8 cores at 4.4. Interesting enough, if we go and we stress this CPU right now, you can see that our VRM temps, even under full stress, with the VRM cooler on, isn't getting very hot at all. Even with all 8 cores being pushed at 4.4 all core, the VRM temps aren't climbing very much. So that's going to be dependent on the amount of flow that the fans that are using can output. It's climbing, but it's nowhere near 60 degrees Celsius. So it can take that load for a little bit. Cinebench R20 gets it pretty hot. Let's see how hot it can get it. We'll stop this right now. See that the VRM temps do take a little bit to cool down compared to other components like the processor. But see how hot R20 gets it when you're running 4.4 all core here. So as you can see, Cinebench R20 is still going through its run, and we're seeing a max of 57 degrees Celsius for VRM temps with the VRM cooler on. So it's a pretty significant improvement there from what we may have seen before.